The alarm on my console screamed before I even reached the docking bay, and I knew, before I saw a single empty crib, that something on this station had gone terribly wrong. My name is Elias Voss. I was a records officer for the Terran Colonial Registry, a quiet job that mostly meant checking cargo manifests and confirming birth certificates for children born on distant mining stations. I was not a soldier. I had never fired a weapon in my life, but on the day I stepped onto Kesh Station, all of that changed forever. Kesh Station orbited a cold gray moon at the edge of a region the Vashtari Empire called Unclaimed Space. It was home to 3,000 miners and their families, and it had a creche, a nursery deck where the youngest children stayed while their parents worked the ore fields. I had visited twice before. I knew the hum of that nursery, the soft lights, the sound of small feet running down the corridor. When I arrived that day, the corridor was silent. Every crib was empty. Every locker was open. The nursery logs were still running, but no one answered when I called out. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the station registry on my portable screen. 5,731 children were listed as residents of Kesh. Not one of them was anywhere to be found. I found the garrison commander's message a few minutes later, buried in the station's communication log. It was addressed to someone I did not recognize, an official of the Vashtari Empire, and it said only this: Asset transfer complete per Imperial Directive 7. No further action required. Asset transfer, that was the phrase they used for thousands of children who had vanished without a trace. I sat in that empty nursery for almost an hour before I found the strength to send my report back to Earth. I expected panic. I expected outrage. What I got, for 4 long days, was silence. The Colonial Assembly argued about jurisdiction. They argued about whether Kesh Station even counted as human territory, since it sat just outside the recognized borders of our system. They argued about whether we had any right to demand answers from an empire that had ruled 1,000 worlds for 3 centuries. Meanwhile, somewhere out there, thousands of children were being taken further and further away from anyone who might come looking for them. On the 5th day, my communicator lit up with a call I did not expect. The voice on the other end was calm, steady, and completely unlike the voices I had been hearing from the assembly all week. Her name was Admiral Nora Bennett, and she did not want my opinion on jurisdiction. She wanted the names. I told her I had thousands of records, not thousands of memories. She told me that before this was over, we would know every single one of them. That was the moment the story truly began, not with a declaration of war, not with fleets gathering in the dark. It began with one woman asking a records officer to remember children neither of us had ever met. Within a week, I was assigned to Admiral Bennett's flagship, a fast reconnaissance vessel called the Clear Horizon. My job was simple on paper. I was there to identify every child from the station registry and help track any signal that might lead us to where they had been taken. In practice, it meant long nights staring at fragments of shipping manifests, trying to find a pattern in a puzzle designed to have none. The Vashtari Empire did not hide its ships well, not because they were careless, but because they never expected anyone to look. For 300 years, no species had dared to challenge an imperial directive. Colonies had vanished before. Entire settlements had been quietly erased from records, and the galaxy had always done the same math: object, and lose everything; stay silent, and lose nothing but memory. Emperor Threl Vashtar had built his rule on that math. He believed humanity, new to the wider galaxy and still finding its feet among older, more powerful civilizations, would do exactly the same calculation. Object quietly, write a formal complaint, move on. He was wrong about one thing. Humanity has never been very good at that particular math. 3 weeks into the search, I found the first real clue. A shipping code repeated across 4 different cargo manifests, each one labeled with a different cover name but the same strange serial number. Admiral Bennett looked at the pattern on the screen for a long moment before she spoke. "That number," she said, "belongs to a transport route used only for one purpose: moving large groups of people who are not supposed to be tracked." We followed that route for 2 more weeks, jumping from system to system, always a few days behind, always finding another empty station or a supply depot with logs that had been wiped clean. It felt like chasing a shadow that knew exactly how to stay just out of reach. Then, on a quiet outpost near the edge of Vashtari space, we found someone who had not been wiped clean. Her name was Priya Malhotra, once a nursery worker on Kesh Station, and she had survived only because she happened to be off station the day the children disappeared. She had spent 3 weeks hiding on cargo ships, moving from world to world, terrified and alone, trying to find anyone who would listen to her. When Admiral Bennett brought her aboard the Clear Horizon, she did not wait to be asked a single question. "They are alive," she said, before anyone could speak. "I do not know for how long, but they are alive." I heard the garrison commander talking. He said the children were valuable labor, too young to resist, easy to train. He said the Empire had done this before, on other worlds, other species. He said no one ever came looking. Her words landed like a weight in my chest, heavier than anything I had felt since that first silent corridor. Not because the children were gone, because someone had planned this so carefully, so confidently, that they never imagined anyone would answer. Admiral Bennett asked Priya only one question. Do you know where they are taking them? Priya nodded, her hands trembling as she pulled up a coordinate on the console. A processing world, she said, a place called Doran's Reach. They said it was far enough that no one would ever find it. They were almost right. Doran's Reach sat deep inside territory the Vashtari Empire considered fully secured, 3 jumps past any border a human ship had ever crossed. Getting there would mean flying straight through space patrolled by Imperial cruisers, ships far larger and far better armed than anything in our small fleet. Admiral Bennett gathered every captain under her command in the flagship's command room, and I stood quietly at the back, feeling completely out of place among soldiers and officers who had trained their entire lives for exactly this kind of mission. She laid out the plan without a hint of hesitation in her voice. We are not going to fight the Vashtari Empire ship for ship, she said. We do not have the numbers, and we never will. We are going to do something they have never faced before. We are going to make sure the entire galaxy is watching before we take a single step onto that world. Her plan was bold in a way that made even seasoned officers exchange uncertain glances. Instead of hiding our approach, we would broadcast it. Every ship, every registry number, every intention, sent openly across every channel the Vashtari Empire and its neighboring worlds could hear. We were not sneaking in. We were announcing exactly who we were and exactly why we were coming. It was Priya who explained why this mattered more than any weapon we carried. The Empire's power rested on silence, she said, on every species believing no one else was watching, and no one would ever help. If they see other worlds watching this, if they see it happening in the open, the Emperor loses the one thing that has always protected him. Her theory would be tested 3 days later, when our small fleet dropped out of transit at the edge of Doran's Reach, broadcasting our identity to every corner of that region of space. The moment felt like standing at the top of a great height, looking down into darkness with no idea what waited below. My hands were steady only because I forced them to be. Around me, the crew of the Clear Horizon moved with quiet, practiced focus, checking systems, confirming positions, preparing for whatever would come next. What came next was not a wall of enemy warships, as some of us had feared. It was silence, and then, slowly, a response neither Admiral Bennett nor anyone else had expected. Other ships began to arrive. They were not human. Some belonged to a quiet, insect-like species called the Halvanari, who had lost an entire colony to a similar directive nearly a century earlier. Others belonged to a small trading alliance from a system 3 sectors away, whose ancestors had once been taken exactly the way our children had been taken now. Word had traveled faster than anyone expected, carried by traders, by refugees, by anyone who had ever felt the same fear Priya described. They did not come to fight for us. They came because they finally believed someone might actually win. Admiral Bennett stood at the center of the command deck, watching the growing formation of unfamiliar ships on the display, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw something close to relief cross her face. He built an empire on the belief that no one would ever stand together, she said quietly. Today he finds out how wrong that belief was. The Imperial garrison stationed at Doran's Reach was not prepared for what arrived at its border. Their communications, once confident and dismissive, grew increasingly urgent as more ships joined our formation. Requests for identification turned into demands, and demands turned, within hours, into something close to confusion. Admiral Bennett allowed the silence to stretch just long enough before she answered them herself, her voice calm and unhurried, broadcast across every channel the garrison monitored. We are here for 5,731 children, she said. We know their names, we know their faces, we are not leaving without them. The response, when it finally came, was not a threat. It was confusion, followed by a request for time to consult higher authority. Admiral Bennett gave them exactly 1 hour. That hour felt longer than the 3 weeks it had taken to find this place. I spent it beside Priya, who sat quietly reviewing old images from the Kesh nursery, matching faces to names one by one, preparing lists that would guide the recovery teams once, if, we were allowed onto that world. When the hour ended, the garrison commander's voice returned, quieter now, stripped of its earlier confidence. The children are here, he said, under Imperial directive protection. Admiral Bennett's answer came without hesitation. Then let us see them. All of them. Today. What followed was not the battle any of us had braced for. It was something far stranger. A slow, careful negotiation played out under the watch of dozens of ships from species who had never before agreed on anything, all of them now united by the simple, unbearable idea of thousands of children taken from their homes. The garrison commander, facing a gathering he could not fight and could not simply ignore, finally allowed a small team aboard the surface facility, myself and Priya among them, escorted by Admiral Bennett and a handful of her officers. Nothing could have prepared me for what we found inside. The children were kept in long, quiet dormitories, fed and clothed but confined, taught only enough to make them useful, never enough to make them curious about the world beyond their walls. When we walked through those halls, calling out names from the old Kesh registry, the silence broke slowly, hesitantly, as small faces began turning toward voices they had almost forgotten they were allowed to hope for. Priya found the first child herself, a boy no older than 6 who had once slept 2 cribs down from the nursery window. He did not recognize her at first, 3 weeks and a lifetime having passed in his young mind. But when she said his name, quietly, gently, something in his face opened like a door no one had used in a very long time. It took the better part of 2 days to account for every child, matching names, faces, and records, making certain no one was left behind in the confusion. By the end of it, every single one of the 5,731 children from Kesh Station stood accounted for, tired, frightened, but alive, and finally on their way home. Word of what happened at Doran's Reach spread faster than any imperial directive ever could. Other worlds, other species who had lost their own children to the same quiet policy over the decades, began asking questions no one had dared ask before. If humanity could gather a fleet of strangers and force an empire to answer, what else might be uncovered? What other silent losses might finally be counted? Emperor Threl Vashtar did not fall that week, or even that year. Empires built over 3 centuries do not collapse in a single confrontation. But something essential broke that day at Doran's Reach, a belief he had relied on for the whole of his long rule. The belief that silence was permanent, that no one would ever come looking, that the galaxy's fear of his empire would always outweigh its willingness to stand together. I stood at the edge of the recovery ship's viewing deck as the last group of children boarded, watching Priya walk among them, checking names off her list one final time, her voice steady now in a way it had not been 3 weeks earlier. Admiral Bennett came to stand beside me, her eyes fixed on the same scene. "You did not sign up for any of this," she said quietly. "No," I answered. "I signed up to check birth records and cargo manifests." She almost smiled. "And instead you helped bring home more children than any single mission in recorded history." I thought about the empty nursery on Kesh Station, the silence that had greeted me that first day, the message that called thousands of children nothing more than assets to be relocated. I thought about how easy it would have been for the assembly to keep arguing about jurisdiction until the trail went cold, until the names became nothing more than numbers in an old registry no one ever opened again. "He thought no one would come," I said finally. Admiral Bennett nodded, watching the last child settle into the safety of the ship behind us. "He was wrong," she said, "and now every world watching knows it." Months later, back on Earth, I returned to my old office at the Colonial Registry, back to birth certificates and cargo manifests, though nothing about that work felt small anymore. Every name I recorded now carried the weight of every name I had once feared would be forgotten. Priya sent me a message not long after, a simple update with no need for reply. The children were settling into new homes, new schools, new lives far from the quiet dormitories where they had spent 3 frightened weeks. She included one photograph, a group of children laughing in a sunlit courtyard, the same faces I had once seen only in old station records. Now finally, fully alive in a way that no directive, no empire, no silence could ever take from them again. I kept that photograph on my desk from that day forward, a quiet reminder of the moment an entire galaxy learned that some silences are not meant to last forever, and that sometimes, the smallest voice, a records officer with no weapon and no training, can be the one who insists that someone finally answer.